Every family has one of them. You know who they are. That Debbie Downer, that bummer Bob. I've even heard the phrase negative Nelson come off some folks' lips in my own family. You know the type. It doesn't matter what you say. They'll turn it into something negative. Let's go to the beach. We're all excited. I don't want to go to the beach. There's jellyfish. They'll sting us. Okay, well, we'll go to the mountains. No, there's rock slides in the mountains. We'll get killed. Most of us can name that downer person in our family, that bummer. If you haven't thought of who that is right now, it might be you. If you're saying, I knew it, nobody likes me, it's definitely you. We can all get down from time to time. Was your favorite part of Hee Haw when they sang, gloom, despair, and agony on me? Deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Oh, gloom, despair, and agony on me. If that was, you're probably the Debbie Downer or the bummer Bob. The problem with these folks is that sometimes they are right. You go to the beach anyway, and sure enough, you get stung by jellyfish. You go to the mountains, and the road is blocked by a rock slide. The Bible has some of these folks in there as well. This one I would call joyless Jeremiah. Jeremiah was known as the weeping prophet. Everything he said seemed like it was negative. I'm sure when the people of God saw Jeremiah coming, they just thought, oh, there he is again. Joyless Jeremiah. Always saying something negative. Always having bad news. We call him the weeping prophet. Poor Jeremiah, though, he had cause for this. His entire ministry was spent under the shadow of Babylon. 3 kings came and went, and each one, Jeremiah warned the king. You must obey God. You must do right. You must trust God, despite that there are these forces that are larger than us. And they did not listen. And finally, King Jehoiakim was taken captive along with his entire court and many others from Judah and taken over to Babylon and held captive. The people thought, surely God will intervene. We are God's chosen people. And Jeremiah says, nope. This is going to take a long, long time. As I've watched us go through this COVID-19, I have felt sorry for leaders who have had to struggle with what to do. We've had to struggle from time to time as a church about, should we do this or should we do that? And I feel sorry for those folks who have had to be modern-day Jeremiahs and had to share the bad news out there. Poor old Dr. Fauci. He had to get out in front of us and say, it's serious, we've got to flatten the curve. He had to tell us we got to stay home, we've got to wear masks, we've got to stay 6 feet apart. This past Thursday, the poor man had to have a polyp removed from his vocal cord. He's been trying to tell us for so long. He's like Jeremiah. He doesn't want to share this bad news. Who wants to give bad news? No wonder Jeremiah wept. He didn't want to share this that God was laying on his heart. And yet he must speak the word of God. Years ago, I did a unit of clinical pastoral education. In that, I was a hospital chaplain for a short while. Here's what they did to us who were chaplains. When things were going really poorly, that's when they called us. The doctor would usually call us into the room, say some negative words, and then say, the chaplain's here, I'll leave now. And there we were. It got to be, anytime I walked in a room, they thought, oh no, the chaplain's here, it's got to be bad. I longed to just be able to share some good news. The people of Israel in the days of the exile also had itching ears to hear something good. And Jeremiah said, there are plenty of prophets out there that will tell you differently, that will tell you what you want to hear, that will tell you that this is no big deal and it will soon be over. In fact, just before Jeremiah chapter 29 that we were looking at today, in Jeremiah chapter 28, there is a prophet named Hananiah. And Hananiah, who is still in Judah, goes to the temple courts that have been torn down, and he calls the people together, and he says to them, it's all going to be over in 2 years. Everything is okay. And they all clap. I don't know if they clapped, but I think they must have said amen or something, because that's what they wanted to hear. It's all going to be okay in just a little while. And Jeremiah steps up and says, amen. I hope you're right. I wish that were true, but you are wrong. God has said that this is not going to be over anytime soon. Jeremiah, too, wanted the best for the people. He did not want to be the weeping prophet, the prophet of doom and gloom, yet he knew it was pastoral malpractice, as a friend of mine has said, to go out and to say what is not right just because someone wants to hear it. Jeremiah was wearing a wooden yoke around his neck, this big yoke as a symbol that we must submit ourselves to God and that God had placed a yoke on the people's neck. Hananiah, when he saw that yoke, went and he took it and he broke it and threw it on the ground. And Jeremiah says, just because you did that doesn't mean you're right. And Jeremiah fashions a yoke of iron and tells the people, you got to settle in. This is going to last a while. And he writes a letter to the exiles with some advice. There's a book written back in the 80s by Robert Schuller called Tough Times Never Last, but Tough People Do. I'm not so sure if Schuller had that totally right. It seems like tough times keep coming and coming and coming. They sure do take a while, even if they don't last forever. Schuller's book was one of positivity about how we can look at different possibilities, and I believe in positive thinking, but there's some things that we just have to face that we just can't wish away. Some things just take a while, and the only way we can get through them is to go through them. Have you ever noticed how everything takes longer than you had hoped? We are like children who sit in the back of the car that say, are we there yet? You've heard them. You try to distract them. We counted cows when I was a kid. Now they have videos in the car. But whatever it is, we want to distract ourselves from what's really going on. But there is work to be done. And it takes however long it takes. When I was younger and I bought my very first house, I was so excited, but it was a bit of a fixer-upper. And one of the projects that I hoped to do was to paint the exterior of the home. And I thought, I can do that myself. I've watched painters. It can't be that hard. It can't take that long. And so I took a week of vacation, and I was going to paint the house. I read about how you do this. And so that first week, I thought, well, I'll take the first day, and I'll prep this house. I'll scrape off the loose paint, and I'll go around and put caulk where it needs caulk. What I thought was going to take the first day lasted the entire week. From sun up to sundown, I was prepping that house. And at the end of my vacation, I was finally ready to do some painting. The problem was my vacation was over. And so every weekend for the next 3 months, I was out there painting that house until finally a bunch of church members showed up one day to help me with it. And they said, Pastor, we got to get you back at church. This house is taking you way too long. Everything takes longer than we think. What do we do when we face these times that are dragging on and on, when we who are in the midst of COVID feel like we are like those Israelites of old who were in exile? What do you do during challenging times? Well, Jeremiah's letter that he wrote to them helps us as well. Jeremiah says when you're in tough times and they're not going away anytime soon, you've got to settle in. He said, go ahead and build houses. Go ahead and live your lives. Go ahead and find spouses and get married and have your children, give them into marriage. In other words, keep living your lives. No matter how much we want things to be different, we have to accept that they are as they are. That we do not have control over everything. Sometimes we just have to sit in the moment and accept it and allow God to be with us. How many times throughout this have you prayed Niebuhr's serenity prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There are some things that we just cannot change right now. I cannot wave a magic wand, neither can you, and make COVID go away. It is a real threat. It is out there, and though I don't want it here, every day someone comes and tells me, pray for so-and-so. I've just found out that they've been diagnosed with COVID-19. It's happened twice already this morning. As much as I wish that weren't going on, it is here. We don't have to be happy about it, but we have to accept that we cannot control it. But we also have to have courage. Courage to change what we can change. And what can we change? We can change our own attitudes. Instead of being negative and thinking we just want it all to go away, we can say, what can we do here in the midst of this? We can at least wear a mask to keep others safe from ourselves, because none of us really know whether we have it or not, because it's there for a while before we even get sick. We can keep our distance. But even more than all that, we as a church can keep doing the ministry that God has called us to do. To find ways to teach our children that God is a loving and just God. To find ways to talk to our teens and our college students who are going through times that are different than anything they had ever imagined. And they need to hear from those of us who have lived through a few days that God is with you and that you will get through this. Jeremiah says, go ahead and build your homes. We may not be building any new homes right now, but our church has already built one, a handicap ramp for someone, and we're going to build another one. Go out and find some projects that you can do safely, and do those for others. Jeremiah says, plant gardens. In other words, find ways to nourish yourself, whether that is with food or whether that is a garden of prayer and Bible study. What can you do to find nourishment? Throughout this summer, I've been so delighted that every once in a while, stuff shows up on my doorstep. I don't have a garden, but I know some good gardeners. Some tomatoes or some squash or some cucumbers, they're just there hanging on the door. And I am so grateful, and it means so much to Valerie and to me. And I think about the love that that represents. Jeremiah says, plant yourselves into the community. Find ways that you can help one another. What is it that you could plant during this time? Yeah, it could be a real garden. But what is it that you could do? What is it that you can invest in? What is it that we as First Baptist Church could do that would produce fruit beyond this time? You remember Arbor Day? Do you plant trees on Arbor Days? I remember when I was a kid, that's what we used to do. On Arbor Day, we would go out in our yard and plant a tree. And I still, when I go home to Warner Robins, Georgia, will drive by a home that my family no longer owns, but I can say, there's the trees that we planted. And they're growing tall and will be there long after me. What is it that you could do that would be an investment? Is there one person that you could find that you could encourage and work with? We took out some little care packages to the teachers that are at East Middle. We wish we could have done every school, but we just chose one school. We just wanted to say to them, we thank you and we want to encourage you, and we hope all teachers know that we care about you. I've been talking to folks who have college students. I've even talked to a few of those myself. But parents calling me and saying, I'm worried about them. It's not the experience we had hoped for them. Could you reach out to one of them? Could you maybe look at the teens that are in our church who are now going back to school or going to school online and find ways to encourage them? I talked about our children earlier. How can we do this? How can we reach out to those who are homebound? How can we reach out to the least of these in our community? Those folks who have lost jobs, those folks who are suffering illness. You see, our church is here for such a time as this. Jeremiah writes to those exiles and he says, seek the peace, seek the welfare, seek the prosperity of the town that you are now in. That's amazing. These folks were captives. They were exiles. They hated the people that had brought them there. And Jeremiah says, seek their welfare, for in their welfare you will find your welfare. In the midst of this COVID pandemic, we are also in an election. Just in case we didn't have enough anxiety, just in case we didn't have enough to fight over and tempers to flare. And who are we to be as a people amidst all of this? When we even have protests right here in our own community. Might we be people who listen to one another and try to bridge gaps and find understanding? Jeremiah says, seek ways of peace. We often look for power. We wish we had more power to do this or do that. But I tell you that Christianity is not a faith about power. Power rests in God. It is a faith of service and servanthood. Jesus, when he was in the wilderness and was told by Satan, you can have all of this if you'll just do what I tell you to, he rejected that type of power. He said, let me show you what real power is. And he gave his life for you and for me in service. How can we as a church in the midst of this time find ways to be a church of servants? Going out and helping others. Yes, we give to Iredell Christian Ministries. Yes, we support Yoke Fellows. Yes, we support a number of local charities, and that is all well and good. But what can we do as individuals and as a church? Years ago, when I moved to North Wilkesboro, I met the mayor of that town. His name then was Conley Call. He's gone on to be with the Lord. And he was a member of the church that I was pastoring. He came in, he sat in my office, he said, Pastor, we're glad you're here. I'm the mayor and I want to have a good relationship with you. I want us to work together. And then he said this to me. He said, I'll tell you a little secret. When the church does well, the town does well. And when the town does well, the church does well. It's a symbiotic relationship. And then he told me something that he told me over and over during my time there. He said, Pastor, a rising tide floats all boats. How can we find a way to make things better for all of us? In other words, don't just think about yourself. Don't even just think about your church, but think about your entire community. How can we be a church that uplifts Statesville and Iredell and beyond, and be that place where folks can come from all walks of life and be in community and fellowship with each other? You see, God is at work, even if we don't see it. Jeremiah says that God is a God of goodness and a God that is bringing about good. After saying to these folks in exiles, you're going to be there a while, so dig in, do your best. He says this of God: for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for good, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And he gives them a secret. He says, then you will call on me and come to me in prayer, and I will listen to you, and you will seek me, and you will find me when you seek me with all of your heart. In other words, God is a good God who is doing good even when we don't understand what God is doing. Henry Blackaby, who wrote that book, Experience of God, says over and over and over again his mantra: find where God is at work and join God there. You don't even have to make it up. You don't have to create it out of thin air. You just have to look for it. But when we're too busy looking inward or having pity parties, we miss it. When I think about this verse where Jeremiah says, God has good plans for you, and the people aren't understanding that, they're not getting what God is doing. I remember a story of a young woman who got angry at her friends one time. She walked by this coffee shop and she saw them all in there talking. And she went home and she was so upset. She was so put off. Every one of them were there and not a one of them invited her. And so she sent them all an email and she just said, I'm done with you guys. You're all getting together behind my back. I bet you're talking about me. And then she got the replies one at a time. Yes, we actually were talking about you. We were planning a surprise party for you next week because it's your birthday coming up. She automatically assumed the worst. Even when we can't see it and we can't understand it, never assume the worst of God. For God is a good God who is doing God's best for us and is calling us to goodness as well. We hear Jeremiah saying to the people, God has plans for you. And when we seek him, he will be found, declares the Lord. I will bring you back from this captivity, he says. I will gather you from the nations where you have been scattered and banished, and I will bring you back from exile, and I will carry you home. Isn't that a beautiful thought? This that we are in right now that feels like a time of exile to us will not last forever. As I've heard folks say from time to time, this too shall pass. Give it time. It won't last forever. But when you are in difficult days, do not waste an ounce of pain. It is too costly. Give it to God and let God work with that and learn something from it of yourself and of others, and do your best. Back during the Second World War, when London was under a blitz, when they were being bombed every night, psychologists were worried that the people would grow depressed, that suicide rates would go up. Do you know what happened? Exactly the opposite. In one of the most devastating times, people seemed to do better And where did that happen? What happened is they all left their homes and they went down into the shelters, and there in the shelters, in fear for their lives, they began to talk to one another and to encourage each other and give hope. In the midst of that difficult days, they found community and strength. They prayed together. We may not be able to physically do that, but we have technologies where we can do that on our phones and on our computers. We can do that old technology of writing notes to one another, of seeking out someone that needs a word of encouragement and saying, God has good plans for you, plans to prosper, plans to bring you to a good hope. This will not last because God will reign. We come now to our time of commitment. James will come and sing this hymn of commitment for us. It is a time for us to meditate and to think of what God is placing on our own hearts and minds. If you would like to be a part of First Baptist Church, our doors are still open. Give me a call this week and let me know if you'd like to place your membership here. If you have something you'd like to talk about, I would be glad to pray with you as you think through your own commitments to God in this time.